So for our final talk of today, I'd like to introduce Mike Pollard from Wild Oxfordshire. Mike's got 30 years experience of working for the RSPB, focusing on the management and development of nature reserves, including our fabulous Otmore. He's now working freelance and manages Oxfordshire's Curlew Recovery Partnership Initiative, hosted by Wild Oxfordshire and funded by Natural England. You're going to talk to us about the Curlews. Mike, are you ready?
Yeah.
I'll give you this one. I'll click you on this. Oh, yes. Just project back. There we go. We're on.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, let's do it on there. Done.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Henrietta, for inviting me along this afternoon to talk about the wonderful curlews and the work we're doing to try and save the curlews across the Upper Thames, because they're under a lot of pressure, a lot of threat at the moment nationally, and we're really important area for our breeding curlews. I'm Mike Pollard. I do a lot of work for Wild Oxfordshire. I think Steve's introduced me, so I won't say too much more, but I'm passionate about the curlews, and there's loads of people in Oxfordshire and in this. Some of you in this room are also passionate about curlews, and we're working together to try and see if we can turn things around for this amazing bird. The Upper Thames really is a vital landscape for curlews. We've got one of the biggest populations that are surviving in lowland England, and the UK overall has a globally important part of both the breeding and the wintering populations of curlews. About 20 to 25% of the global breeding population. Only Finland and Russia have bigger breeding populations of curlews. But the numbers have halved in the last 25 years. And in some parts of that range on the right, Ireland and Wales, that map is quite out of date. Those populations have declined greatly in the last decade. And some of our populations in lowland England as well started to disappear. But we have about 50 pairs in the Upper Thames, and that's 10% of our lowland population here in England. Now, some of the essential facts about curlews. It is the UK's largest wader, a large bird. The female's slightly bigger than the male. She's got a longer bill, and if the pair are together, you can identify that difference quite easily. Got the curlew skull here. Amazing adaptation to its feeding ecology. Can you see? Great long bill. Brilliant for wading, probing down in the deep muds of the estuary to pull out their food. But equally adept, see the very fine, very agile point to that beak. Very adept at picking small prey items off our hay meadows, small prey items. So it's sort of adapted to two very different environments, but does equally well in both. Yeah, they're long-lived birds, which is fortunate for us. These birds come back year after year, so they can survive without necessarily breeding successfully for a number of years. Some of them live for up to 25 years. March time is just the start of the breeding season. Our curlews are starting to return to Oxfordshire at the moment. It's a very exciting time, and we're starting to hear the wonderful call of the curlew across the meadows at the moment. And it runs to July, the breeding season. They nest on the ground in the meadows, sometimes in heathlands, moorlands, rough grassland. They lay 4 eggs, sometimes 3. Takes a month to incubate those eggs and 5 weeks to fledge those chicks. So it's a long time for a meadow breeding bird to be going through its breeding cycle. The chicks are independent as soon as they hatch. Amazing. We'll show you 1 or 2 pictures of chicks later on. The adults, as I mentioned, feed by both probing and picking invertebrates off the grass. This gives you a quick resume of the curlews year. As I mentioned, they're just coming back at the moment. We're fortunate enough to have them between March and July. In July, most of them are leaving. Very few we would see by August. And then a few curlew pass through the area on migration at other times in the autumn. And then, you know, from sort of August through to February, they're on their coastal breeding areas, sorry, coastal wintering areas. I'll talk about that a bit later as well. Now, curlews haven't always been around in our landscape, in our countryside here. In the 19th century, they were just seen on migration and were, it seems, quite regularly shot. This is the first record that we could find of mentioning curlew in our area. And this is a place called Ayno, which is in the Cherwell Valley. It's actually just on the Northamptonshire side of the Cherwell Valley. And 1882 to 1830 there, you can see at the bottom, oops, sorry. Yes, several birds of unusual occurrence in this neighbourhood have been shot here. Scolopax arquata or curlew. So yeah, sadly, every time a curlew turned up, it was shot. Also, the bald coot, the water rail, horned owl, hen harrier, gold-crested wren, and the rock pigeon. I would love to see horned owl and hen harrier at Ayno. Now, I've never seen either species in the Banbury area, so sadly, we're missing all those birds. But we'll carry on. The birds of the Banbury area also recorded shot specimens procured in Adderbury, Ayno, and Deddington. An example, a party of 5 near Williamscott a few years ago. And these are all sort of Cherwell Valley sites where the curlews actually started breeding in the 20th century. Curlews started breeding in Oxfordshire in 1925 at Otmore, and there were 4 pairs there by 1949. And it was in the 1930s and 40s that curlews really colonised the Upper Thames valleys, so places like the Cherwell Valley, the Tame, the Och. They became quite widespread. The populations were doing well in the uplands, and for a number of reasons, they had high productivity, and there was a lot of habitat here in lowland England that was suitable, both the heaths of the New Forest, and some of the upland areas like Dartmoor, so and Breckland. The curlews spread out and colonised our area, so that by the time of the Oxfordshire Bird Atlas in 1985 to 88, you can see the sort of distribution was very much as we see it today, in fact, pretty much. Got my pointer here. This is the Thames Valley here. I think this is the Och area here. This is the sort of Otmore Ray area here, and you've got the Cherwell Valley here. But I've put a box around this population here in south east Oxfordshire, because by the time of the BTO Atlas, that population completely disappeared. So literally, 20 years later, the rest of the distribution is quite similar over here, with little pockets across this is Buckinghamshire and across to Bedfordshire. But a whole population had disappeared. So if any of you can shed light on that, would be interesting. But it just shows that in some parts of our lowland England, the curlews are disappearing over a period of 20 years. Some counties have fared worse than ours. In Warwickshire, for example, the population's gone from about 40, 50 pairs down to about 5 pairs currently over probably about 40, 50 years. So sadly, the curlews aren't doing too well, generally speaking. We've done a lot of research, though, a lot of surveys of curlews over the years, and the Banbury Ornithological Society was actually kicked this off in 1959, just after this society was established, and found 10 pairs of curlews in the Cherwell Valley. But as you can see, successive surveys organised by the BTO and the RSPB and the BOS show that the curlew population sustained for quite a long period, and then populations dropped more recently. But can you see the big BTO study started in the 1980s? That was the time when awareness was really heightened about the loss of breeding wading birds generally. And a lot of time, research and effort was put in at that stage. And then that converted to a lot of conservation action in the following decades. This is one of our study areas in the Cherwell Valley where we've got this data going back the longest, so a great long data set. And can you see the population? Sorry, it's a bit faint. 1971 on the left-hand side there, going right through to 2019. So the population dropped from 6 pairs down to 4 pairs, down to 3, 2, and 1. So not great news there. One of the things about curlews is they are quite sociable birds, and they do like to roost together. And now's quite a good time to try and locate a curlew roost. Shallow pools, they use flooded fields. They gather together, particularly at the moment, and then towards the end of the breeding season. But they can visit the roosts almost right through the season. This is one near Banbury at a little nature reserve looked after by the BOS at Bullscott, and we monitor that quite regularly. And here the numbers roosting actually peaked at 18 birds, and it's dropped a little bit more recently. But these birds come in right at sort of dusk and leave at dawn. So it's, yeah, quite fun being up there at dawn in June and have the place to yourself. But I'm going to talk a little bit more now about the actual breeding of the curlew. Probably a familiar sound, hopefully a familiar sound to you, the song of the curlew, which we're starting to hear now. And they're coming back to their meadow breeding sites, places like the Cherwell Valley. And these are wonderful places for nature, of course. So this is one of our sites which we monitor. And it sort of shows you why these sites are so good for curlews as well, because there's an abundance of different flowers. With the ragged robin, we've got meadow saxifrage, we've got narrow-leaved water dropwort, and we've got, you know, a nice range of invertebrates here as well. And it's this rich grass and habitat that provides the ideal conditions, particularly for the chicks when they start to hatch. And we have some nice places to go and do our field work as well, of course. This time of year, the grass is quite short, of course, so the curlews are starting to look for where they're going to nest, generally making a cup there in the grass. Very occasionally in an arable situation, but that's quite rare in Oxfordshire. You see that more in Breckland. They lay their 3 to 4 eggs, generally about the last week of April, first week of May. And then, fingers crossed, they start incubating. Let's see if they can hatch their chicks. But they do have quite a lot of hazards to navigate through if they're going to hatch successfully. They're nesting out in the open. There are predators around, foxes, badgers, ravens, other birds. And also in the Cherwell Valley, we're finding spring floods can be quite a problem. We lost a nest a couple of years ago to a spring flood. Might be disturbance. There's other factors that can affect them. Human and dog disturbance, for example, might be a problem. But at this time, we've got a big team of volunteers now who are out looking for nests. And the reason we're doing this is to try and protect them. We can protect them with electric fencing. There's just a couple more examples of the nests there in the grass. These can be quite commercially managed grasslands. They're not all species-rich hay meadows. They can be sort of grass lays even, silage fields. And to see, can anyone see it's a bit of a challenge here. Sorry, it's like whether anyone can actually spot the curlew nest there. There is a little head there now. Yeah. That is what we're looking for. But you may have had 2 or 3 days of observation leading up to spotting that curlew nest or curlew head on a nest. Anyway, that's great challenge for us to find the nests, and we've got some very skilled volunteers doing this. Once we've found the nest, then we have a small team that comes in to put a 20 metre by 20 metre electric fence. It's 4 strands of wire, goes round the nest. We do it in about 30 to 40 minutes, then we leave again. The curlews adapt to it straight away. They just fly over the fence and back onto the nest. And it does work really well. This keeps the foxes and the badgers away from the nests, so it protects the curlew nest until it hatches. And then we go back in late May, and hopefully there's maybe an alarming curlew in the next field or elsewhere in that field, and we'll find evidence of a successfully hatched curlew nest here with the egg sort of shell remains in the cup. The chicks are very precocious, as I mentioned, but they're absolutely adorable. They are fully ready to feed. They've got very big legs. They've got this beak which they can use to find the little insects that are around the meadow at that time, and they feed very avidly. And the curlew parents are extremely good at looking after the chicks. And if you go anywhere near the curlew chicks, the adult will make this alarm call. They'll get very agitated. So if you do hear that, if you're out in the meadow and you do hear this, it's your cue really to go away. Go away, please. I've got chicks here. You're at risk of disturbing them. So do remember that if you're out in the field, you hear an alarming curlew, it's because they've got a nest or chicks. Most likely when they've got chicks. And here's some little tiny chicks in the Cherwell Valley. And yeah, again, just emphasizing how vulnerable these birds are. And once they hatched out, particularly then it's the avian predators that may be a threat. And by this time, also farmers are looking to make their silage or haylage or hay, often in the middle of June. And we have all the drama of maybe trying to help chicks survive the hay cutting operation, because you've got the cutting itself, then the turning of the hay, and then the baling of the hay. All of those can threaten the chicks getting caught up in that operation. And some of our farmers are very adept at finding the chicks themselves, or we will go out and try and help them to do that, or try and nudge the family of curlews out of that field into the next field while they carry out the haymaking. But all this work does culminate eventually, and we have had some successes with curlew chicks fledging. This is one we had a couple of years ago, that from that fence nest, by the 4th of July, you can just see it was able to take one of its first flights, and then it gradually developed through that period in July. So by the 22nd of July, the young curlew was very sort of strong flying, still with the male curlew in attendance, but really quite independent. Now, one of the interesting things about curlews is that the female curlew often leaves leaves the male with the brood after 3 or 4 weeks. Around week 3, she will head off more to feed on her own, and maybe actually migrate to the coast and leave the male with the chicks. So there's a bit of a sort of, different roles, if you like, of the male and the female. But sort of, I wish sometimes the female would stay around a little bit longer, because the chicks seem very vulnerable, like 4 or 5 weeks old. Maybe another adult will be helpful, but they know what's best. If you're out watching birds in the local areas, if you're very lucky, you might stand a chance of seeing a fledged juvenile. Can you see this lovely photograph from one of our local gravel pits? This is the juvenile curlew on the right, stretching its wings, and also standing at the back here behind the adult male here. You see the difference in plumage. It's fairly subtle, but quite marked in terms of this sort of buffy, fresh feathering of the juvenile and the more sort of worn, darker feathering of the male. But if you see the two together, if you see curlews in July, take a lot of interest. You might have an adult with a chick, and you might have a bird with colorings. Yeah, so there's the wintering distribution around the coast. Our birds tend to go west and south, and birds wintering on the east coast of England will come from Scandinavia. Everything sort of moves west. Ours go south and west, some of them around the Severn Estuary. I'm going to talk a little bit more now about what we can do for the conservation of the curlew and how we're working together in partnership on our current curlew recovery project, which is hosted by Wild Oxfordshire, but it's very much a partnership project. It's funded by Natural England from their species recovery, delivered pretty much through our volunteers across the catchment and all our partners on the right there. These are the areas where the project's currently active, from the Ock down in the south right through those key river valley areas and up even into South Warwickshire in the north there. And the different organisations involved, including the Wildlife Trust, RSPB, Natural England, Freshwater Habitats Trust, River Thames Conservation Trust, and the Banbury Ornithological Society. And just a reminder that one of the reasons why Oxfordshire is still pretty good for curlews and other wading birds, and one of the main reasons is because of the establishment of the Upper Thames tributaries environmentally sensitive area back in 1994, the forerunner of more recent countryside stewardship schemes. But that basically started paying farmers to manage their land, their meadows, their wet grasslands for breeding waders, and it's enabled us to retain quite a big expanse of this all-important habitat, and has helped fund, the management of the big reserves like RSPB Otmoor, like the Bee Bout, Chimney Meadows, etc., and farmers who are happy to manage their land in this way. So this has really been really critical. And the new government versions of countryside stewardship are going to be vital for the long-term prospects of the curlew. This is our last year's breeding curlew results. Just picked out in red there. Sorry, there's a lot of data there. Picked out in red some key ones. See Otmoor there, 21 pairs. That 21 pairs of curlews at Otmoor was the highest number of curlews that the RSPB recorded at Otmoor. So that's something we can celebrate. We were searching around for 6 good news stories. That was definitely one. So Otmoor had a number of good breeding seasons for curlew. Last year wasn't one of them, but they have fledged quite a few chicks. So large-scale habitat management for curlews has worked there. Down over here, see the 20, that was the number of nests that we fenced last year in our patch. We also fenced 2 in South Warwickshire. So gives you an idea, out of the 50 pairs, we're fencing, nearly half of the nests of those pairs. And the only area that really fledged a lot of chicks last year was along the Thames. And probably some of those are at Chimney Meadows, and one of the 2 of the farmland sites further along the Thames did really well. But it's a really quite a sad picture, really, overall. We think maybe 8-10 chicks fledged out of 50 pairs, so that's nowhere near what we need. We need, for every pair, we need half a chick to fledge each year to be viable. So we're some way off that at the moment. Yeah. And sorry, this is just a similar sort of figures. I mentioned about the 20 nests. We're hatching about 80% of those nests. And the volunteers along the Thames had an amazing result because they hatched, 100% of their 7 nests. So that was it well exceeded our expectations, and that directly led to some chicks fledging. So big congratulations to the team there, including Anne Cotton from Natural England. Many of you will know Anne Cotton. She's been working on this project for a long time and has done an amazing job developing this particular piece of work. For a couple of years now, a small number of chicks have also been fitted with colour tags by Colin Wern, who's our lead ringer. This has actually given us some really useful information. 3 chicks were flagged at Otmoor in 2021, and 8 were flagged last year at 3 sites. The Otmoor chicks from year before last, one of them flew across to County Kerry by August, and then last year was seen back at Upton Warren. Gives you an idea of the movements of these young birds. And another one went all the way down to Brittany. Hasn't been seen since. And one last year ringed on the Thames, made the relatively modest trip down to the Severn Estuary and stayed there. So different strategies from those juvenile birds. But interestingly, some of the head-started birds I'll talk about next, some of them have taken a similar sort of route. So head starting's been in the news quite a lot because it's being used as a major conservation measure for a number of projects. It's where the eggs are taken from sites where the nests are unlikely to survive, particularly on air bases where the nests have to be cleared, unfortunately. The eggs are then incubated and the chicks raised and then released. And some of those have been released quite close to us at Slimbridge, not far away. And these Slimbridge birds are the ones that have turned up with us. So 2 years ago, one was seen at Gallows Bridge at Beebout, and last year one was seen at Radcott along the Thames there. So look out for, when you see a curlew, look out for these flags and tags and rings. We should be able to find out where that's come from, what its history is. Nearly finished. I'm just going to say a few more thoughts about future prospects for curlews. You know, it's really challenging working in conservation of wading birds in the lowlands because of all these pressures on them. You've got to get the habitat right. You can't have too much predation. We really need big areas well managed for curlews, and we're fortunate we do have some big areas. We need to keep building on those, make the habitat even better where we can. And increasingly, we need farmers working together in their cluster groups, working with you know, experts, advisors, other conservation organisations, so that the curlews have landscapes that they can breed in and that they can feed in, because they feed over quite wide areas. You know, they might breed in a 10-hectare meadow, but you can bet they could easily be going 5-10 kilometres away to feed at times. And one bit of good news is that most of our curlew areas now have farmer clusters in place. The farmers working together with Natural England support and with others supporting them. It's definitely the way forward, and Oxfordshire seems to be leading the way in quite a lot of farmer cluster work, which is brilliant. Long way to go, but promising signs there. There's lots we can do individually to help curlews. Do report your sightings. Do consider becoming a field worker, helping us with the conservation work. There's quite a few organisations I mentioned all helping with the Curlew project, and I'm sure many of you supporting them, but keep up that support. Try and protect your curlew areas. Some of them are threatened with development, one way or the other. Make sure that your curlew records go in. It's so frustrating. I've got sites that have gone by the wayside because we didn't know curlews were there, and they were never picked up by surveys by you know, the consultant ecologists. So we need to make sure that doesn't happen. Sites are much better known now, but do all you can to protect your key sites in your area and just help raise awareness. And World Curlew Day is coming up 21st of April. So if you're on your social media, or if you've got events, or you're doing some, you know, if you've got an opportunity, celebrate World Curlew Day on the 21st. This is my final slide. I do need to mention two publications. One, if you want to read more about curlews, then do read Mary Colwell's Curlew Moon, because that tells you the story of the fate of curlews, the challenges, and she's a great advocate. Many of you will have heard Mary speak. She chairs the Curlew Recovery Partnership, which is this one here. If you want to get more involved, sign up and join the Upper Thames Wader Group, Thames Curlews, email address there. And also, of course, sign up to the Wild Oxfordshire Bulletin. If you're not aware of that, the bulletin comes out every month, and it's a great source of information. My time is up. If you want to read more about my study of curlews in the Banbury area, you can see that on the BOS website here. And also there's a shortened version of it in the Banbury Ornithological Society annual report. I've got a couple of spare copies. If any of you are particularly interested to read that or interested in joining the BOS, then come and see me afterwards. We've got those. And that's it. Thank you. Thanks for listening.